The pen trembled in my hand as Derek's grip crushed my wrist beneath the polished oak desk. My cousin Vanessa leaned forward, her perfume sweet but suffocating, her smile wide enough for the security cameras yet sharp enough to cut through my last shred of peace. "Emily," she whispered through clenched teeth, sliding the inheritance papers closer. "Sign now. You'll thank me later." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, indifferent to the storm inside me. Around us, lawyers, investors, and reporters buzzed with conversations about stock markets and mergers. Nobody saw that I was a prisoner at my own family's table. I swallowed hard, forcing a shaky breath into my lungs. My father's legacy, everything he had worked for, sacrificed for, balanced on the tip of my pen. One wrong move, and it would all be gone. And then, with hands that barely obeyed me, I pushed a folded slip of paper toward the banker. He opened it discreetly, and his face blanched as he read my desperate scrawl. "Help. I'm being coerced." His voice cracked. His hand pressed a hidden button, and then the alarm rang, shattering the illusion, stripping away the masks, and dragging my cousin's empire into the unforgiving light of truth. But before that alarm sounded, before the world saw the truth about Vanessa and Derek, there was a story that began long ago, one of loyalty, sacrifice, and betrayal by the very people I once called family. 25 years earlier, I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor of my childhood bedroom, organizing a collection of seashells I'd gathered during our annual family vacation to Cape Cod. My father knocked gently on the doorframe, his smile tired but warm. "Emmy, look who's here," he said, stepping aside to reveal Vanessa, her small suitcase clutched in both hands. At 9 years old, she was already beautiful, with glossy chestnut hair and eyes that sparkled when she smiled. And she smiled often then. "Mom and Dad are fighting again," she explained with a casualness that broke my heart. "Uncle Jack said I could stay here for a while." My father, Jack Carter, the most decent man I've ever known, nodded behind her. "Vanessa will be with us for the summer, Em. I'm counting on you to show her how we do things around here." That summer stretched into fall, then winter, and by the time spring flowers pushed through the soil in our modest backyard garden, Vanessa had become a permanent fixture in our home. Her parents' marriage had dissolved in a toxic cloud of accusations and resentment, neither wanting the burden of a child who reminded them of their failures. My father never complained. A widower since I was 4, he simply added another place setting at our dinner table, enrolled Vanessa in my school, and expanded his overtime hours at the construction company to cover the additional expenses. "Family takes care of family," he would say, his voice firm with conviction. "It's not about blood, Emmy. It's about what you do with the love you're given." For years, our household found its rhythm. Dad worked tirelessly to provide for us, coming home with calloused hands and sawdust in the creases of his neck. I learned to cook, to manage our modest budget, to keep our lives running smoothly. Vanessa learned to charm, to want, to compare what she had to what others possessed. "Don't you ever wonder what it would be like to live in a big house?" she asked me once as we walked home from high school, passing the sprawling estates in the neighboring district. "To never worry about money? To have people look at you like you're somebody?" Shrugged. "Dad says we are somebody. That's why we work hard." She rolled her eyes, a habit that had become increasingly frequent. "Your dad says a lot of things, Emily. But look at him, breaking his back for scraps while his boss lives in a mansion. That's not being somebody. That's being used." By 18, the gap between us had widened beyond years or circumstance. I chose the local community. College, staying close to help Dad, whose arthritis had begun to limit his work hours. Vanessa, with her stunning looks and practiced smile, secured a full scholarship to an East Coast university and departed with barely a backward glance. "You're wasting your potential," she told me the night before she left. "You could be so much more than your father's keeper. And you could be grateful," I replied, immediately regretting the bitterness in my tone. Her expression hardened for just a moment before dissolving into a laugh. "Oh, Emmy, I am grateful. Uncle Jack taught me to aim high, remember? That's exactly what I'm doing." Over the next decade, our lives diverged further. I completed my degree in business management, taking night classes while helping Dad run the small hardware store. He'd opened after his construction days ended. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work that served our community. The store became a gathering place for local contractors, do-it-yourself homeowners, and neighbors seeking advice along with their supplies. Vanessa, meanwhile, blazed through the corporate world, leveraging her intelligence and beauty into rapid advancement. She married Derek Chambers, an investment banker whose family connections opened doors that talent alone couldn't access. Their wedding was featured in regional magazines, a lavish affair that Dad and I attended in our Sunday best, feeling distinctly out of place among the designer gowns and champagne fountains. "Your cousin has done well for herself," Dad whispered during the reception, his pride untainted by envy. "Just like you've done well in your own way, Emmy." I squeezed his hand, noticing how the arthritis had twisted his fingers. "Different paths, Dad. That's all." What I didn't say was how Vanessa had changed, how her eyes now calculated worth before offering warmth, how her laughter seemed practiced rather than spontaneous. I didn't mention how she'd introduced us to her new in-laws as family from the country, or how she'd gently steered us away from conversations with Derek's business associates. We rarely saw each other after that, except for obligatory holiday calls and the occasional family event. When Dad's health began to decline 3 years ago, I reached out to Vanessa, hoping the girl who had once been like my sister might want to visit him. "We're swamped with the new development project," she explained over the phone, her voice distant and distracted. "But send him our love, of course. And let me know if you need anything." I didn't tell her what we really needed: time, presence, the comfort of family gathering close when shadows lengthened. Instead, I thanked her and returned to Dad's bedside, reading him the sports section and pretending not to notice how quickly he was fading. My father passed away quietly on a Tuesday morning, with me holding his hand and the spring sun filtering through half-drawn blinds. His last words to me were simple: "You've made me proud every day, Emmy. Remember that." The funeral was small but dignified. Vanessa and Derek arrived late, their designer mourning clothes immaculate, their condolences brief. As we stood by the freshly covered grave, Vanessa placed her hand on my shoulder. "We need to talk about the estate, Emily," she said. "There are some matters that require immediate attention." I looked into her eyes that had once shared childish secrets and midnight confidences with me, and saw nothing but polished ambition. "Not today," I replied. "Today is for Dad." She nodded, her smile understanding, but her eyes, impatient. "Of course. We'll call you tomorrow." I should have recognized the warning signs then. I should have remembered that Vanessa had always wanted more than she had, and had always believed she deserved it. But grief clouded my judgment, and the lessons were still to come. The first signs of trouble arrived disguised as concern. 3 days after we buried my father, Vanessa and Derek appeared at my door bearing gourmet sandwiches and a leather portfolio embossed with the logo of Derek's investment firm. "We thought you might not be eating properly," Vanessa explained, sweeping into the kitchen as if she still belonged there. She unpacked the food while Derek set the portfolio on the dining table with deliberate precision. "Your father's affairs need attention, Emily," he said, his voice carrying the smooth authority that had undoubtedly served him well in boardrooms. "As family, we want to help shoulder that burden." I accepted a sandwich but eyed the portfolio warily. Dad's affairs are pretty straightforward. The store, the house, his savings. I've already spoken with his lawyer. Something flashed across Derek's face, annoyance quickly masked by concern. "Gerald, Hoffman? Nice old fellow, but hardly equipped for estate management in today's complex financial landscape. Dad trusted him for 20 years, I replied simply. Vanessa sat beside me, her hand covering mine in a gesture that would have seemed affectionate if her fingernails hadn't pressed slightly too hard against my skin. "Emmy, you're grieving. You shouldn't have to deal with legal and financial headaches right now." Her voice softened to the tone she'd used as a teenager when trying to borrow my favorite sweater. "Let us handle this for you. Derek's firm specializes in wealth management." I withdrew my hand gently. "There's not much wealth to manage. The store does okay, and Dad was careful with money, but we're talking about a modest estate." Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You'd be surprised. The commercial property alone where the hardware store sits has appreciated considerably, and Jack was a saver, probably had more tucked away than you realize." That night, after they left, I called Gerald Hoffman. The elderly attorney confirmed what I already suspected. My father had indeed been careful with his money, investing consistently over decades. The hardware store property, which he'd purchased when land in our growing town was still affordable, had quadrupled in value. His life insurance and retirement accounts had all named me as sole beneficiary. "Your father wanted security for you, Emily," Gerald explained. "He built something solid brick by brick. The estate isn't vast by some standards, but it's significant, close to $2 million in total. Assets." The figure stunned me into silence. Dad had never lived like a man with assets worth millions. He'd driven the same truck for 15 years, patched his work clothes until they couldn't be salvaged, and treated himself to one fishing trip each year as his only luxury. He was proud of providing for you, Gerald continued into my silence, and he trusted you to be wise with what he left behind. The calls began the next day. Derek, then Vanessa, then Derek again, each conversation circling around the same points. They had insights about the estate. They knew investment opportunities that could honor Jack's legacy. They had concerns about Gerald's capabilities. When calls didn't work, emails arrived, followed by text messages, then unexpected visits. Each time, the pressure increased slightly, the language more urgent, the offers of help more insistent. 2 weeks after the funeral, Vanessa arrived alone, her eyes red as though she'd been crying. "Derek and I are in trouble, Emmy," she confessed, perched on the edge of my sofa. "The development project I mentioned, it's failing. Investors are pulling out, and we've leveraged everything." My heart softened despite my wariness. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do?" Her expression brightened with hope. "Actually, yes. We need a cash injection to keep the project afloat until we can find new investors. If you could loan us just a portion of Uncle Jack's estate, even temporarily, it would save us." "How much are we talking about?" I asked, already uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. 500,000. She said it casually, as though requesting bus fare. "Just for 90 days with interest, of course. By then, we'll have secured new backing." I stared at her, stunned by both the amount and the ease with which she requested it. "Vanessa, that's a quarter of the entire estate. I can't or won't." Her voice hardened. "I lived with Uncle Jack for 8 years. Emily, he was like a father to me, too. Don't you think he'd want to help me in a crisis? I think he'd want me to be careful with what he spent his life building," I replied quietly. Her tears dried with remarkable speed. "You've always been selfish, Emily. Always the perfect daughter, the responsible one, while judging everyone else. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for family support in a difficult time." I held firm, but the encounter left me shaken. That night, I called Gerald again and explained the situation. "I'm concerned, Gerald. The pressure is getting intense." His response was measured but firm. "I suggest you limit communication with them for now, Emily, and under no circumstances should you sign anything they present to you without having me review it first." The warning proved prescient. 3 days later, a courier delivered a package containing what appeared to be standard financial documents, with post-it notes indicating where I should sign. A handwritten note from Vanessa explained they were time-sensitive estate filings that Derek's firm had prepared to save me the trouble. Gerald's review revealed they were anything but standard. The documents would have effectively transferred control of most liquid assets to a family trust managed by Derek, with provisions that would make it nearly impossible for me to reclaim control without lengthy legal battles. "This is concerning," Gerald said, his normally gentle voice sharp with alarm. "These documents represent a sophisticated attempt to gain control of your inheritance through misrepresentation. I strongly advise caution going forward." What followed was 6 months of escalating pressure. Vanessa alternated between tearful pleas and cold accusations. Derek made veiled references to tax implications and regulatory issues that could compromise the estate without his firm's protection. When I changed my phone number, they appeared at the hardware store, causing scenes that disturbed customers and staff. Then came the rumors. Suppliers mentioned hearing the store was in financial trouble. A local bank officer called to confirm information about loan applications I had never submitted. A potential buyer approached one of my employees claiming the property was soon to be available. I was being systematically undermined, my father's legacy targeted from multiple angles. The community that had respected Jack Carter for decades was being fed doubts about his daughter's competence. Through it all, I kept the store running, maintained my dignity, and consulted regularly with Gerald, who documented each incident with growing concern. "They're getting desperate," he warned after reviewing a particularly aggressive email from Derek. "Desperate people take desperate actions. Be vigilant, Emily." I never imagined how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how soon I would find myself at that polished oak desk in the bank, with Derek's fingers crushing my wrist and Vanessa's smile stretching thin with triumph. The invitation arrived on embossed stationery, delivered by courier to the hardware store on a Tuesday afternoon. "Chambers Financial. Group cordially requests your presence," it read, detailing a meeting at First National Bank regarding final resolution of the Carter estate matters. The date was set for Friday at 2 p.m. I called Gerald immediately. "Don't go alone," he advised, his voice carrying the weariness of his 80 years. "I'd accompany you myself, but I'm scheduled for a medical procedure that day. I'll reschedule," I offered, anxiety already building at the prospect of facing Vanessa and Derek without support. "No need," Gerald replied. "Take Martin from my office. He's young but sharp. Won't let them intimidate you." When Friday arrived, I dressed with deliberate care. A navy pantsuit that had been my splurge for professional meetings, simple pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother and my father's, watch, too large for my wrist but comforting in its solid presence. I felt his strength accompanying me. Martin called 30 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I've been in a fender bender on Highway 9. No injuries, but the car isn't drivable. I've called a rideshare, but I'll be at least 45 minutes late." My stomach tightened. Should I reschedule? That's up to you. But these bank meetings often can't be easily rescheduled without penalties or delays. If you feel comfortable starting without me, go ahead. I'll be there as soon as possible. Just don't sign anything until I arrive. The bank lobby gleamed with marble floors and mahogany paneling, its atmosphere of wealth and stability designed to instill confidence. The receptionist directed me to the 3rd floor, where an assistant escorted me to a conference room at the end of a hushed corridor. I wasn't prepared for what awaited me. Instead of the small meeting I'd expected, the room was filled with people. Derek at the head of the table, Vanessa beside him, along with 3 men in expensive suits whom I didn't recognize. A woman with a stenographer's notepad sat in the corner, and a bank officer I'd never met stood by a sideboard arranging papers. Most surprising was the presence of 2 local reporters, one from the Business Journal and another from our town's newspaper. They nodded at me with professional curiosity. "Emily, right on time." Derek rose, extending his hand as though we were casual acquaintances. "We've been looking forward to finalizing everything today." "I wasn't aware this would be such a public meeting," I said, remaining near the door. "My attorney is running late. I'd prefer to wait for him." Vanessa's smile tightened. "Oh, Emily, always so cautious. This is just a formality. Signing the final paperwork to protect your father's legacy. The press is here because Derek is announcing a major community investment initiative afterward." "Using Dad's money?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Derek laughed, directing the attention of everyone in the room toward me. "Your father would have approved, Emily. We're establishing the Carter Community Development Fund, revitalizing the old warehouse district, creating jobs, honoring Jack's commitment to this town." The reporters perked up, pens poised. One of the suited men, introduced as State Senator William Hargrove, stepped forward to shake my hand. "Your cousin and her husband have developed an impressive plan," he said. "The tax benefits alone make this a smart move for the estate." I felt increasingly cornered, aware of the carefully orchestrated pressure building around me. Every face watched expectantly, the narrative already constructed, the reluctant heiress finally embracing her responsibility to the community, guided by her more sophisticated relatives. "I'd still prefer to wait for my attorney," I insisted, my voice steadier than I felt. Derek's smile dimmed slightly. "We're all on a tight schedule here, Emily. The senator has another engagement, the reporters have deadlines, and the bank officers have reserved this room only until 3:30. "Just sit down," Vanessa hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "You're embarrassing yourself." Reluctantly, I took the only available seat, directly across from Derek, with Vanessa to my right. The bank officer immediately placed a stack of documents before me, post-it notes marking signature lines. Everything about the situation felt wrong, but walking out would make me appear unreasonable to the assembled witnesses. "Before we begin," Derek announced to the room, "I want to thank everyone for coming to this significant moment. The Carter legacy is about to make a transformative impact on our community." He launched into a presentation, complete with digital slides displaying architectural renderings of revitalized storefronts, green spaces, and community centers. None of this had been discussed with me. None of it reflected what my father would have wanted, but it photographed well, and the reporters nodded approvingly as they took notes. "And now," Derek concluded, "we just need Emily's signature on these standard transfer documents, and we can make the official announcement." All eyes turned to me. The bank officer slid a pen across the polished table, an expensive fountain pen that gleamed under the recessed lighting. The room had grown warm, or perhaps it was just my rising panic. "I'd like to review these first," I said, reaching for the topmost document. Derek's hand landed on mine, his grip friendly to observers but painfully tight. "The legal language can be overwhelming," he said smoothly. That's why we've simplified everything with the signature tabs. Your lawyer can review copies afterward. His fingers pressed harder into my wrist as he leaned closer, his voice dropping. Don't make a scene, Emily. You're outnumbered and outmatched. Sign the papers, smile for the cameras, and you'll get a nice monthly stipend to live on. Vanessa touched my other arm, her expression concerned for the benefit of onlookers. You look pale, Emmy. Are you feeling all right? It was the childhood nickname that did it. The audacity of using that intimate connection from our shared past to manipulate me now. Something cold and resolute settled in my chest. I would not be bullied into surrendering my father's legacy to their greed. I need a moment, I said, pulling my hand free from Derek's grasp. And a glass of water, please. The bank officer immediately moved to the sideboard where a pitcher waited. While attention shifted to him, I quickly assessed my options. Martin wouldn't arrive for at least another 20 minutes. My phone was in my purse, but any attempt to call for help would be immediately obvious. That's when I noticed the notepad in front of the bank manager's place setting. Small, discreet, meant for banking notations. With steady movements that belied my racing heart, I tore a corner from it while pretending to organize the documents. The water arrived. I thanked the officer, took a small sip, and asked, which document should I review first? Derek, relieved by my apparent cooperation, began explaining the first form, a transfer of property deed for the hardware store. As he spoke, beneath the table shielded by the document I was ostensibly reviewing, I wrote 5 words on the scrap of paper. Help. I'm being coerced. When Derek finished his explanation and pushed the paper closer, indicating where I should sign, I folded the note tightly between my fingers. Before I sign, I said, I'd like to confirm with the bank manager that these transfers comply with standard procedures. I turned to the officer who had brought my water. Would you mind taking a look? As he stepped forward, I handed him the first document with my left hand. With my right, I slipped the folded note directly into his palm, maintaining eye contact and hoping my expression conveyed the urgency I couldn't voice. He glanced down, confused at first, then discreetly unfolded the paper. I watched his eyes widen slightly as he read my plea. For a moment, I feared he might dismiss it, might assume family disagreements weren't the bank's concern. Then his gaze met mine, and I saw understanding dawn. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. Excuse me, he said, his voice remarkably steady. I need to retrieve another document from my office for this transaction. I'll be right back. Derek frowned. We have everything we need right here. Bank policy, the officer replied, already moving toward the door. For transfers of this magnitude. 90 seconds passed before the alarm split the air. Not the wailing evacuation siren I expected, but a series of sharp, insistent beeps that instantly commanded attention. The conference room door opened and 2 security officers entered, followed by an older man, whose tailored suit and authoritative presence suggested upper management. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced over the alarm, which continued its rhythmic warning. I'm Howard Mercer, Regional Director. I must ask everyone except Ms. Carter, Mr. and Mrs. Chambers, and our bank staff to please exit the room. There's a security concern we need to address. Confusion rippled through the assembled group. The reporters gathered their notebooks, exchanging curious glances. Senator Hargrove looked annoyed at the interruption, but collected his briefcase. Derek rose halfway from his chair. This is completely unnecessary, he protested. We're in the middle of an important transaction. Howard Mercer's expression remained professionally neutral. Nevertheless, sir, I must insist. He gestured to one of the security officers who moved to hold the door as the guests filed out. Once only the principal parties remained. Mercer pressed a button on the wall, silencing the alarm. The sudden quiet felt heavy with tension. Ms. Carter, he said, turning to me, our branch manager has indicated you believe you're being pressured to sign these documents against your will. Is that correct? Before I could answer, Derek let out a bark of laughter. This is absurd. We're family helping family navigate complex financial matters. Vanessa's face had drained of color, but she quickly recovered. Emily has been under tremendous stress since her father's passing. She's clearly confused about standard legal procedures. I drew a deep breath, feeling strangely calm now that the moment had arrived. I am not confused. I have consistently refused to transfer my father's estate to their control. They organized this meeting under false pretenses, invited press and politicians to pressure me, and Derek physically restrained me. I held up my wrist, where the marks of his fingers were beginning to show. I wrote that note because I felt trapped and threatened. Mercer nodded gravely. Ms. Chambers? Mr. Chambers, these are serious allegations. They're also completely unprovable, Derek snapped, his charm evaporating. It's her word against ours. The branch manager, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. Actually, sir, all conference rooms in our executive suite are equipped with security cameras and audio recording for the protection of our clients and staff. Standard my banking protocol. Derek's face went slack. Vanessa's perfect posture collapsed slightly. Furthermore, Mercer continued, our legal department has completed a preliminary review of these documents while we were clearing the room. They contain several provisions that appear designed to circumvent standard inheritance law. At minimum, we cannot proceed with these transactions today. This is a family misunderstanding, Vanessa said, her voice tight with controlled panic. Emily is overwrought with grief, imagining threats where none exist. We only want what's best. What's best for whom? The new voice came from the doorway, where Martin stood, slightly disheveled from his rushed arrival. Emily Carter? Or yourselves? He moved to my side. I'm Martin Weiss, representing Ms. Carter, and I believe we'll be taking these documents for review by the district attorney's office. The next hour passed in a blur of statements, documentation, and quiet legal threats. Security escorted Derek and Vanessa from the building, their carefully crafted public image in tatters. The reporters who had been waiting in the lobby caught glimpses of their angry departure and sensed a bigger story. Then the planned announcement. By the time Martin and I left the bank, I felt hollow yet somehow lighter, as though a weight I'd carried for months had suddenly lifted. We stood on the steps in the afternoon sunlight, watching as Derek's luxury car screeched away from the curb. Are you all right? Martin asked. I considered the question carefully. No, I answered honestly, but I will be. That evening, alone in my father's house, my house now, truly and securely, I sat at the kitchen table where he had taught Vanessa and me to play cards, to balance checkbooks, to make decisions based on values rather than impulses. I wondered where I had lost her, or if I'd ever really had her at all. My phone buzzed with messages from the reporters seeking comments, from neighbors who had heard rumors, from hardware store employees worried about their jobs. I silenced it and made tea in my father's favorite mug, chipped at the rim but sturdy. The legal aftermath would be messy. Gerald called to warn me that Derek and Vanessa wouldn't surrender easily, that they might face charges for attempted fraud but might also file countersuits. There would be depositions, possibly a trial, certainly. Publicity that would expose our family's broken bonds to public scrutiny. We'll fight it, he assured me. Your father's estate will remain intact. When I finally slept that night, I dreamed of Dad standing in the hardware store, arranging tools with his methodical precision. Always use the right tool for the job, Emmy, he said, words he had repeated throughout my childhood. And remember that the simplest solution is usually the best one. In my dream, I understood he wasn't just talking about fixing leaky faucets or hanging shelves. He was talking about integrity, about navigating a world where some people would always want what others had built, where shortcuts tempted even good people, where standing firm sometimes meant standing alone. I woke at dawn, made coffee, and walked. Through the quiet rooms of the house where I'd grown up, photos of Dad and me at various ages lined the hallway. Fishing trips, store openings, high school graduation. And yes, photos with Vanessa too, from those years when she had been part of our family, when her smile had seemed genuine, when perhaps it had been. By the time the sun fully rose, I had made a decision. I would protect what my father had built, but I wouldn't let bitterness consume me. The hardware store would continue serving the community. The money would be managed responsibly, with portions designated for local education and small business grants. Not the flashy development project Derek had envisioned, but meaningful support for people trying to build something lasting, as my father had. And Vanessa? I would let the legal system address her actions, neither seeking revenge nor offering easy forgiveness. Some betrayals cut too deep for simple resolution. Some bonds proved too fragile for repair. But I wouldn't allow her choices to define my path forward. That afternoon, I returned to the hardware store for the first time since the bank confrontation. News traveled fast in small towns. Customers offered awkward sympathy, asked careful questions, watched me with curious eyes. I answered honestly but briefly, then redirected conversations to their projects, their needs, the reason they had come to Carter's Hardware in the first place. By closing time, I had helped 3 customers find exactly the right tools, ordered inventory, scheduled staff for the coming week, and begun to feel the first tenuous threads of a new normal taking shape. Not healed, not whole, but moving forward. As I locked the front door, I noticed a familiar car parked across the street, Gerald's ancient Buick, with the man himself dozing in the driver's seat despite his doctor's orders to rest after his procedure. I walked over and tapped gently on the window. "Just checking on you?" he said sheepishly as he woke and rolled down the window. "Wanted to make sure you were managing all right." I smiled. The first genuine smile in longer than I could remember. "I'm managing, one day at a time. Jack would be proud," he said simply. As I watched his car pull away, I thought about the note I'd passed to the bank manager. 5 desperate words that had changed everything. Not by granting me power or wealth or vindication, but by reminding me that sometimes asking for help was the strongest thing you could do. 6 weeks after the bank confrontation, I stood in the courthouse parking lot, watching rain collect in puddles around my sensible shoes. The preliminary hearing had concluded with the judge ordering Derek and Vanessa to surrender their passports. The fraud investigation was proceeding, with enough evidence for the district attorney to pursue criminal charges. Martin emerged from the building, shaking water from his umbrella. "That went as well as we could hope," he said, joining me under the awning. "Their attorney is already floating plea deal possibilities." I nodded, feeling neither triumph nor satisfaction, just a hollow weariness. What happens next? They'll likely accept a deal to avoid jail. Time, probation, fines, restitution. It depends on what else the financial investigation uncovers. He studied my face. "You don't seem relieved." "I'm just tired," I admitted. "I didn't want any of this. I didn't want criminal charges or courtrooms or seeing my family name in newspaper headlines." Martin's expression softened. "For what it's worth, your father would be proud of how you've handled everything." I managed a small smile. "That's worth quite a lot, actually." The hardware store had become my sanctuary during these difficult weeks, the one place where life proceeded with predictable rhythms of inventory, customer service, and practical problem-solving. I'd started making small changes, updating the lighting, reorganizing displays to be more intuitive, adding a coffee station where contractors could gather in the mornings. Customers had been surprisingly supportive after the initial scandal broke. Many shared stories of my father helping them during tough times, extending credit when money was tight, delivering materials after hours for emergency repairs, offering expert advice that saved them from costly mistakes. Their loyalty wasn't to Carter's Hardware as a business, but to the values it represented in our community. That afternoon, after returning from court, I was restocking shelf brackets when the bell above the door chimed. I turned to greet the customer and froze. Derek's mother, Eleanor Chambers, stood in the entrance, immaculate in a camel-colored coat despite the rain. We had met only a handful of times at family events, always brief, polite, interactions that felt like professional networking rather than family connections. Eleanor moved in social circles far removed from my father's world, and she had made little effort to bridge that gap. "Emily," she said with a nod, "may we speak privately?" I gestured toward the small office at the back of the store. Once inside, with the door closed against curious ears, Eleanor remained standing, declining the chair I offered. "I'll be direct," she began, her voice carrying the polished edges of old money. "This situation has become untenable for everyone involved. The negative publicity is damaging our family's standing and business interests." I waited, sensing there was more coming. "I'm prepared to offer you a settlement," she continued. $2 million, matching your, father's estate value, in exchange for dropping all criminal charges and signing a non-disclosure agreement. You keep your inheritance intact, and we put this unfortunate episode behind us." The offer was generous on its surface. A clean resolution that would end the legal battles, the public scrutiny, the emotional drain of fighting family. For a moment, I was tempted by the simplicity of it. Why? Now? I asked instead. Why not before the bank meeting? Before the fraud attempt? Eleanor's perfectly composed expression flickered. Derek and Vanessa made poor choices. I don't condone their methods, but I understand their motivations. The development project they envisioned could have transformed this town. Using my father's money without my consent, I pointed out. Using capital that was sitting idle, she countered smoothly. Your father lived like a working man despite having the means for much more. Derek saw potential where Jack saw stability. She made the word sound like a character flaw. I felt a surge of protective anger. My father valued honesty above all else. He believed in earning what you have, not taking what belongs to others. Eleanor sighed, the sound expressing generations of patrician impatience with middle-class morality. Noble sentiments, but practical considerations remain. This legal process will be lengthy, expensive, and painful for everyone. My offer would allow you to move forward without further distress. I studied her. This elegant, formidable woman who had raised a son to believe that wanting something was sufficient justification for taking it. I wondered what my father would say in this moment, what lesson he would draw from this encounter. "I appreciate your offer, Mrs. Chambers," I said finally, "but I can't accept it. This isn't about money, it's about accountability. What Derek and Vanessa attempted wasn't just financial fraud. It was a betrayal of trust and family bonds." Eleanor's lips thinned slightly. "I see. Well, if you change your mind, the offer stands for 48 hours. She moved toward the door, then paused. "You know, Emily, I always thought you were the sensible one. Apparently, I was mistaken." After she left, I sat at my father's old desk, running my fingers over the worn surface where he had calculated estimates, written orders, and occasionally helped me with homework. The wood held decades of honest labor in its grain, a tangible reminder of the values that had shaped my life. The settlement would have been easier. The money wasn't the point. It was the same amount as my inheritance anyway. The point was the principle. Some things couldn't be resolved with checkbooks and legal documents. Some betrayals cut to the heart of who we are and what we stand for. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor at home. Vanessa arrived unannounced, looking nothing like the polished, confident woman who had pressed me to sign away my inheritance. Her designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and a simple sweater, her perfect makeup absent, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual assertiveness. I hesitated, then stepped aside. We had grown up in this house together. She knew its corners and creaks as well as I did. In the living room, she perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Eleanor told me about her offer, about your refusal. It wasn't the right solution," I said simply. Vanessa's eyes met mine, and I was startled to see genuine emotion there. Not calculation or manipulation, but raw pain. "Nothing I say will undo what happened. I know that, but I need you to understand how we got here." "I'm listening," I said, taking the chair across from her. "The development project wasn't just about money," she began. "It started as something good. Affordable housing, community spaces, local businesses. Derek believed in it. I believed in it." She twisted her wedding ring, a massive diamond, that caught the lamplight. "But the investors backed out when the economy shifted. Derek had leveraged everything, convinced he could make it work. And my inheritance became the solution to your financial problems." I finished for her. She nodded, shame finally visible in her expression. "At first, it was just going to be a loan. Then Derek started talking about partnership, then management. Rights. It spiraled so quickly." She paused, blinking back tears. "I told myself it was still for the greater good, that you didn't need that much money, that the project would benefit everyone, that you'd understand eventually. Did you ever consider just asking me? Honestly, directly? Derek said you wouldn't understand the opportunity, that you were too cautious, too much like Uncle Jack." Vanessa wiped at a tear that escaped. "And I resented you, Emily. I always have, in some ways." The admission hung between us, heavy with decades of unspoken tension. "Why?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "You had everything, scholarships, opportunities, success. But you had him," she said softly. "Uncle Jack. He loved you unconditionally, completely. My own father couldn't stand the sight of me, said I reminded him too much of my mother. And my mother, well, she was too busy rebuilding her life to worry about a child who reminded her of a failed marriage." Understanding dawned slowly. While I had envied Vanessa's glamorous life and worldly success, she had envied the one thing I took for granted, a father's unwavering love. "Dad loved you too," I said. "You were like a daughter to him." "No," she said with sad certainty. "I was a responsibility he accepted. You were his world, Emily. Every decision he made, every sacrifice, every plan for the future, it was all for you. I was just adjacent to that love." We sat in silence, the truth of our shared history settling between us like dust in sunlight, visible now in ways it hadn't been before. "What happens now?" she asked, finally. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "The legal process will continue. There are consequences that can't be avoided." She nodded, resigned. "Derek and I are separating. He blames me for not convincing you to sign. I blame him for the fraud scheme. A bitter laugh escaped her. Turns out neither of us is very good at accepting responsibility. As she rose to leave, I felt a complicated mixture of emotions: pity, lingering anger, and something else that might eventually become forgiveness, though we weren't there yet. "Take care of yourself, Vanessa," I said, meaning it despite everything. She paused at the door. "You know what's ironic? Uncle Jack would have helped us if we'd just been honest about the trouble we were in. He always did." After she left, I sat alone in the quiet house, thinking about patterns that repeat through generations. How Vanessa had sought validation and security in wealth and status, just as her parents had. How Derek had pursued shortcuts to success rather than building something lasting. How my father had chosen a different path, one of steady work and integrity. And how I, standing at the crossroads of these examples, now had to choose what kind of person I wanted to be, not just in this crisis, but in all the days that would follow. 3 months after the bank confrontation, life had settled into new patterns. The criminal case against Derek and Vanessa had concluded with a plea deal: 2 years probation, significant fines, and community service. The financial investigation had uncovered additional irregularities in Derek's business practices, resulting in civil penalties and the collapse of his investment firm. The media attention had finally faded, allowing me to walk through town without feeling eyes following my every move or conversations pausing when I entered a room. Carter's Hardware continued to serve the community, and I had implemented some of my own ideas, expanding the garden section, offering DIY workshops on weekends, establishing a small scholarship fund for local students pursuing trades. On a crisp autumn morning, I arrived at the store to find an unfamiliar man waiting by the entrance, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. He was perhaps in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered hands of someone who worked outdoors. "Emily Carter?" he asked as I approached with my keys. "Yes, that's me," I replied cautiously, still wary of strangers after everything that had happened. "Michael Donovan," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "I'm an architect. I was hoping to discuss a project with you if you have a few minutes." Inside, as I prepared the store for opening, Michael explained his purpose. "I've been commissioned to design a community center for the East Side neighborhood. The funding is in place, but we're looking for a hardware partner for materials and expertise." I raised an eyebrow. "And you thought of us? We're not the biggest supplier in town." He smiled, crow's feet crinkling at the corners of his eyes. "Your father helped my dad build our family home 20 years ago. He spent hours explaining different types of lumber, insulation options, the pros and cons of various fixtures. Dad always said Jack Carter cared more about the right solution than the expensive one." The memory warmed me. "That sounds like Dad." "The community center is being funded by a coalition of local businesses and residents," Michael continued, spreading drawings across the counter. "It will include after-school program spaces, a small library, meeting rooms, and a workshop where kids can learn basic construction and repair skills." As he outlined the vision, I found myself genuinely interested for the first time in months. This wasn't a flashy development project designed to maximize profit or prestige. It was a practical, meaningful addition to a neighborhood that needed community resources. "We'd like Carter's Hardware to be the primary supplier," Michael concluded. "And we're hoping you might consider serving on the advisory board. Your experience would be invaluable." I studied the plans more closely. Who else is involved in this project? The funding comes from about 20 local businesses. The land was donated by Eleanor Chambers. I looked up sharply. "Eleanor Chambers?" Michael nodded. "Apparently, she's had a change of heart about certain investments. Wanted to do something that would create lasting value for the community." The coincidence seemed too precise to be accidental. I wondered if this was Eleanor's way of making amends without directly acknowledging wrongdoing, a gesture that aligned with her sense of propriety while still addressing the underlying harm. "I'd like some time to consider the proposal," I said finally. "Of course," Michael agreed, leaving his contact information and the preliminary drawings. "Take all the time you need." That weekend, I drove to the proposed site, a vacant lot that had once housed a warehouse, now cleared and ready for new purpose. The East Side neighborhood had been declining for years, with limited resources and fewer opportunities than the more prosperous Western districts. A community center would provide needed services and a gathering place that might help revitalize the area. I thought about my father's approach to business and community, how he had viewed them as interconnected rather than separate spheres. Carter's Hardware had never been just about selling tools and materials. It had been about helping people build and maintain the physical structures of their lives. After careful consideration, I called Michael and agreed to both the supply contract and the advisory board position. If Eleanor Chambers was involved, I would work with her professionally while maintaining personal boundaries. This project was larger than our complicated history. The groundbreaking ceremony took place on a sunny October morning. Local officials, business owners, and community members gathered around the freshly staked perimeter. I stood among them, feeling both connected to and separate from the proceedings, still healing from the past year's events, but increasingly oriented toward the future. Mayor Harrison gave a brief speech about community investment and cooperation. When he introduced the project partners, I found myself standing beside Eleanor Chambers for the ceremonial photo. We hadn't spoken directly since her visit to the hardware store. "I'm pleased you decided to participate," she said quietly as camera flashes captured our uncomfortable proximity. "The project has merit," I replied neutrally. "Dad would have approved." Eleanor nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Your father built things to last. It's a quality I've come to appreciate more recently." The construction process unfolded over the following months. I found myself increasingly engaged with the details, consulting on material choices, suggesting practical modifications to the design, arranging for discounted supplies from Carter's vendors. The store became a hub for contractors working on the project, and I expanded our inventory to meet their needs. Michael Donovan became a regular presence both at the hardware store and in my thoughts. His commitment to the project matched my own, and I found myself enjoying our conversations about everything from sustainable building materials to local history. His passion for creating spaces that served human needs resonated with my father's practical values. "You know," he said one evening as we reviewed tile options after hours, "you've completely transformed these plans. The workshop space especially, it's going to be 10 times more functional because of your input." I shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. "I just made some practical suggestions." "That's exactly what was needed," Michael insisted. "This project could have been just another building, attractive but generic. Your contributions have given it soul." As winter settled over our town, the community center's frame took shape against the gray skies. I visited the site regularly, watching as abstract plans became concrete reality. Sometimes I imagined my father walking beside me, pointing out joinery techniques or commenting on the roof pitch. His presence felt closer in these moments of creation than it had since his passing. Eleanor Chambers also visited the site occasionally, though we maintained a careful distance. I noticed changes in her demeanor, a new willingness to engage with contractors directly, to listen more than she spoke, to consider practical concerns rather than just aesthetic ones. Whether these changes reflected genuine growth or calculated image rehabilitation, I couldn't say, but I appreciated the effort either way. One year. Afternoon, as I was checking a lumber delivery at the construction site, Eleanor approached me directly for the first time in weeks. "Emily, do you have a moment?" she asked, her usual composure slightly frayed around the edges. We walked to a quieter area away from the workers. Eleanor seemed to struggle with words, an unusual state for someone typically so articulate. "I received a letter from Vanessa yesterday," she said finally. "She's moved to Seattle, taken a position with a nonprofit organization focusing on affordable housing development." I nodded, unsurprised. Vanessa had always been adaptable, capable of reinventing herself when necessary. "I hope it works out for her." "She mentioned you've been corresponding," Eleanor continued, a question in her tone. "Occasionally," I confirmed. After our conversation at my house, Vanessa had sent a formal letter of apology. My response had been brief but not dismissive, acknowledging her regret without offering easy absolution. Since then, we'd exchanged a few emails, cautious attempts to establish a new, more honest relationship from the ashes of the old one. "That's generous of you," Eleanor said, seeming genuinely puzzled by my willingness to maintain any contact. I considered how to explain it in terms she might understand. "Family is complicated. What happened was wrong. Seriously, criminally wrong. But completely cutting ties doesn't necessarily heal anything." "And Derek?" she asked, her voice tightening slightly at her son's name. "We don't correspond," I said simply. Unlike Vanessa, Derek had offered no genuine apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing beyond what was legally required. His remorse extended only to being caught, not to the betrayal itself. Eleanor nodded, accepting this boundary. "For what it's worth, I believe he's learning some difficult lessons now." According to local gossip, Derek had been forced to sell their mansion and move to a much more modest home. His social standing had collapsed along with his business, and former associates now avoided him. The material consequences of his actions had finally caught up with him, though I took no pleasure in his downfall. The community center will be completed on schedule, Eleanor said, changing the subject. The grand opening is set for spring. That's good news, I agreed. The East Side has waited long enough for this resource. As she turned to leave, Eleanor hesitated. Your father built more than structures, didn't he? He built character in those around him. I see that now. The admission, so understated yet profound coming from her, caught me by surprise. Yes, I said simply. That was his greatest skill. Later that evening, as I closed the hardware store, Michael arrived with coffee and a folder of final fixture selections that needed approval. We had fallen into a comfortable routine of after-hours consultations, our professional relationship gradually warming into something that might become friendship. How was your day? He asked, settling into the chair across from my desk, my father's desk, though I had begun to think of it as my own. Interesting, I replied, recounting my conversation with Eleanor without revealing anything too personal. She seems different somehow. Michael considered this. People can change when their foundations are shaken. Sometimes it takes losing everything you thought mattered to discover what actually does. The observation lingered with me as we reviewed lighting options and door hardware. I had lost my father, nearly lost my inheritance, and definitely lost my illusions about family loyalty. Yet somehow, I felt more grounded than before, more certain of my own values and direction. The community center needs a name, Michael mentioned as he gathered his materials to leave. The committee is considering options. What about the Jack Carter Memorial Community Center? I suggested impulsively. Michael's smile was warm. That would be fitting. I'll propose it at the next meeting. After he left, I locked up and walked home through the quiet streets, my mind full of possibilities that hadn't existed 6 months earlier. The hardware store was thriving under my management. The community center would soon provide needed resources to the East Side, and I was gradually building connections based on genuine respect rather than obligation or manipulation. Dad had always said that when one door closes, another opens, but only if you're willing to look up from the disappointment of the closed door to see the new opportunities before you. Standing at my front porch, I paused to look at the stars visible above the streetlights, feeling a sense of peace that had been absent for too long. The path forward wouldn't be simple or straight, but for the first time since that fateful day at the bank, I felt fully capable of walking it on my own terms. Spring arrived with a riot of cherry blossoms and the scent of new beginnings. The Jack Carter Memorial Community Center, the name had been unanimously approved, was nearing completion, its red brick exterior and large windows bringing warmth to the once neglected corner of the East Side neighborhood. On a mild Saturday morning, I walked through the nearly finished spaces with Michael, checking final details before the grand opening scheduled for the following weekend. The main hall gleamed with polished hardwood floors sourced through Carter's Hardware. The workshop, my particular project, was equipped with workbenches built to my father's exacting specifications. What do you think? Michael asked, watching me run my hand along a countertop. Does it meet with the Carter seal of approval? I smiled, feeling a sense of pride that extended beyond mere commercial involvement. Dad would love it, especially the workshop. He always said everyone should know how to use their hands to fix what's broken. Wise man, Michael replied. That philosophy applies to more than just leaky faucets and wobbly tables. Over the past months, our professional collaboration had gradually evolved into something deeper. We'd shared meals after long planning meetings, exchanged books we thought the other might enjoy, discovered common ground in our views on community responsibility and personal integrity. Michael had become someone I trusted, a rare commodity after all that had happened. The dedication plaque arrived yesterday, he said, leading me toward the main entrance. I wanted you to see it before it's installed. Mounted on temporary stands was a simple bronze plaque bearing my father's name and a quote I had chosen. Build with purpose, maintain with care, share with generosity. Below was a brief description of his contributions to the community through both his construction work and the hardware store that had served generations of local families. Seeing his name commemorated so publicly brought unexpected tears. I blinked them back, touching the raised letters gently. It's perfect. Thank you for pushing this through the committee. It wasn't just me, Michael admitted. Eleanor Chambers was particularly insistent. She made quite a passionate speech about your father's legacy. The revelation surprised me. Eleanor did that? He nodded. She's been different these past few months. More engaged with the actual community impact, less concerned with recognition. As if summoned by our conversation, Eleanor herself appeared in the doorway. She hesitated upon seeing us, then approached with measured steps. "Emily, Michael," she greeted us, with a slight nod. "I came to check on the final preparations." "We were just discussing the dedication plaque," Michael said, gesturing toward the bronze marker. Eleanor studied it, her expression softening slightly. "Your father deserves the recognition. This town benefited from his presence in ways many never fully appreciated." Coming from her, the acknowledgement carried particular weight. Eleanor had always moved in circles that valued wealth and influence above practical contributions. That she now recognized my father's worth represented a significant shift in perspective. "Thank you," I said simply. That would mean a lot to him. An awkward silence followed, broken when Michael tactfully excused himself to check on the installation team in another area, leaving Eleanor and me alone with the plaque bearing my father's name. "I've been meaning to speak with you," Eleanor said once Michael was out of earshot. "About Derek." I tensed slightly. Despite the months that had passed, the memory of Derek's grip on my wrist at the bank still triggered a visceral response. "Is there something I need to know?" Eleanor sighed, looking suddenly older and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "He's leaving town. Accepted a position with a small firm in Arizona. A chance to start over, away from—" She gestured vaguely. "All of this." I nodded, unsure what response she expected. Derek's departure would close a painful chapter, but I felt neither satisfaction nor regret. Just a quiet relief. "Before he goes," Eleanor continued, "he wanted me to give you this." She reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope. "He wrote it himself. I haven't read it." I accepted the envelope reluctantly, feeling its weight in my hand. "I can't promise I'll read it." "That's your choice," she acknowledged. "But I hope you will. Not for his sake, but for your own." We walked together toward the exit, an unlikely pair bound by complicated history. At the door, Eleanor paused, looking back at the community center that now bore my father's name. "Your father built things that lasted," she said quietly. "Derek and I, we pursued things that glittered. There's a lesson in that which came too late for some of us." After she left, I sat on a bench outside, turning the unopened envelope over in my hands. Part of me wanted to tear it to pieces unread, to deny Derek even the small satisfaction of having his final say. But another part recognized that true healing might require facing this last remnant of the past. Finally, I opened it. The letter inside was brief, written in Derek's precise handwriting. "Emily, words cannot undo what happened, nor do they merit your forgiveness. I won't insult you with excuses or explanations. I simply want to acknowledge the truth. What I did was wrong. Criminally, morally, fundamentally wrong. Your father was a better man than I will ever be. The community center that bears his name will stand as testament to his values long after my own hollow achievements have been forgotten. I am leaving, not to escape consequences, but to stop causing further pain to those around me. I wish you peace and prosperity in the life you have, so honorably defended. Derek." The letter contained no requests, no self-justification, no subtle manipulations, just a straightforward admission of wrongdoing and recognition of my father's superior character. It wasn't an attempt to rebuild bridges that had been thoroughly burned, but rather an acknowledgement that some actions cannot be undone, only accepted and learned from. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope, neither angered nor comforted by its contents. It was simply an ending, one last thread being tied off before the final page turned. When Michael returned, he found me still sitting on the bench, watching the late morning sun illuminate the brick facade of the community center. "Everything okay?" he asked, settling beside me. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I think it is." The week leading up to the grand opening passed in a flurry of activity. Final inspections were completed, furniture was arranged, program schedules were printed. Carter's Hardware closed early on Friday so the entire staff could help with last-minute preparations. The morning of the dedication dawned clear and bright. By 10 o'clock, the parking lot was filled with community members, local officials, and media representatives. Children played on the newly installed playground while their parents chatted in groups, exploring the facility that would soon become a cornerstone of neighborhood life. Mayor Harrison delivered opening remarks, followed by the head of the community association and several key donors. When my turn came to speak, I approached the podium feeling a curious blend of grief and gratitude. My father believed in building things that matter. I began, looking out at the assembled faces. Friends, neighbors, former strangers now connected by this shared endeavor. Not just structures, but relationships, communities, opportunities. This center embodies those values not because it bears his name, but because it will serve the practical needs of real people, day after day, year after year. As I spoke about Dad's legacy and the community's future, I noticed familiar faces in the crowd. Gerald Hoffman leaning on his cane, hardware store customers nodding in recognition of shared memories, Michael watching with quiet pride from the side of the stage. In the back row stood Eleanor Chambers, dignified and simple, attire that no longer screamed wealth and status. Our eyes met briefly, and she offered a small nod of acknowledgement. Not friendship, exactly, but a kind of respect that transcended our complicated history. After the ribbon cutting, as visitors explored the new facility, I found myself standing in the workshop that had been my special project. The tools hung in neat rows. Workbenches waited for. Eager hands and large windows filled the space with natural light. A group of teenagers was already examining the 3D printer with fascination, while an elderly man demonstrated proper hand-planing technique to his granddaughter. Michael found me there, watching the intergenerational exchange of knowledge. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his shoulder lightly touching mine. "That Dad would love seeing his workshop already being used exactly as he would have intended," I replied. He believed in passing skills forward, in teaching people to solve their own problems. "A philosophy worth preserving," Michael agreed. "Like father, like daughter." As the day progressed, I moved through the building that now carried my father's name, witnessing the community embrace the spaces we had created. Children discovered the library corner, seniors gathered in conversation areas, young parents accessed resources they desperately needed. The center was already fulfilling its purpose, bringing people together, providing practical solutions, creating connections. By evening, as the crowds thinned and the sun set behind the brick walls, I stood in the quiet main hall, absorbing the echoes of the day's celebrations. The journey from that terrible moment at the bank to this peaceful evening had been longer and more painful than I could have imagined, yet somehow necessary, each step leading me here, to this place of quiet strength and clear purpose. 1 year after the community center dedication, I stood behind the counter at Carter's Hardware, helping Mrs. Jenkins select the right paint for her dining room renovation. The store had evolved over the past months, expanded inventory, updated computer systems, even a small coffee corner where customers lingered to discuss projects and share advice. "Your father would be so proud," Mrs. Jenkins said as I mixed her custom color, "not just of the store, but of how you've handled everything." I smiled, touched by her comment. The town's collective memory was long. People still occasionally referenced that awful business with the Chambers family, but increasingly conversations focused on present achievements rather than past betrayals. "I hope so," I replied, securing the paint can lid. "I'm trying to build on his foundation." After Mrs. Jenkins left, I checked my watch and quickly closed the register. Saturday afternoon meant workshop time at the community center, my favorite part of each week. What had begun as a casual volunteering commitment had evolved into a structured program teaching basic home repair skills to anyone interested in learning. Today's session focused on simple electrical repairs, replacing outlets, installing light fixtures, understanding basic circuit safety. The class was already gathered when I arrived, a diverse group ranging from single mothers wanting to handle their own repairs to retirees maintaining aging homes on fixed incomes. "Sorry I'm late," I announced, setting down my demonstration materials. Mrs. Jenkins couldn't decide between ballet slipper and blush rose for her dining room. Laughter rippled through the group. Many were store customers familiar with Mrs. Jenkins' deliberate decision-making process. As I began the workshop, demonstrating proper technique while explaining safety precautions, I noticed Eleanor Chambers standing quietly at the back of the room. Though she served on the center's board, she rarely attended actual programming. Yet here she was, notebook in hand, paying careful attention to my instructions on wire stripping and connection. After the formal demonstration, as participants practiced with the provided materials, I made my way to her. "This is unexpected," I said, nodding toward her presence at a basic skills workshop. A hint of embarrassment colored her cheeks. "I've lived in houses all my life without understanding how they actually function. Recent circumstances have made self-sufficiency more appealing." I knew, through town gossip rather than direct information, that Eleanor had significantly downsized after paying Derek's legal bills and restitution costs. She now lived in a modest townhouse, comfortable but requiring maintenance she had previously delegated to hired professionals. "Would you like some hands-on practice?" I offered, gesturing toward the workbenches. "The outlet simulators are completely safe." To my surprise, she nodded and followed me to an empty station. I guided her through the process of replacing an outlet, watching as her manicured hands awkwardly manipulated tools they had never held before. Despite her initial clumsiness, she persisted, concentrating intently until the connections were secure and properly tested. "Well done," I said, when she successfully completed the task. First-time electrical work can be intimidating. "It's empowering," she admitted, examining her handiwork. "Knowing how things work, being able to fix them yourself." The moment felt significant. This woman who had once valued only status and appearance now finding satisfaction in practical knowledge and self-reliance. Perhaps some good had emerged from the painful collapse of her family's fortunes after all. After the workshop concluded, I gathered my materials, preparing to return to the store for a few final hours before closing. Eleanor lingered, clearly wanting to say something more. "I received a letter from Vanessa last week," she said finally. "She mentioned you two met for coffee when you were in Seattle for the hardware suppliers convention." I nodded. "We did. It was not exactly comfortable, but worthwhile." Vanessa and I had established a cautious new relationship over the past year. Not the close bond of our childhood, but a measured connection based on honesty rather than obligation. Her work with the affordable housing nonprofit seemed genuinely fulfilling, and she was building a life defined by her own choices rather than external expectations. "She seems changed," Eleanor observed, "more grounded." "I think we all are," I replied. "Sometimes painful lessons are the most transformative." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed." She hesitated, then added, "The board is considering expanding the center's programming. Given the success of your workshops, we'd like to discuss the possibility of a more comprehensive trades training initiative, perhaps with apprenticeship opportunities through local businesses." The proposal intrigued me. That aligns perfectly with Dad's values. He always believed in creating pathways to self-sufficiency. "We were hoping you might take a leadership role in developing the curriculum," Eleanor continued. "Your practical knowledge, combined with your connection to local contractors through the hardware store, makes you uniquely qualified." The offer represented a natural evolution of my involvement with the center, a chance to extend my father's legacy in meaningful ways. I'd be interested in exploring that possibility. As Eleanor left, Michael arrived, carrying blueprints for his latest project, a renovation of the town's historic library. Our professional collaboration had blossomed into a relationship that now encompassed both work and personal connection. Weekend hikes, quiet dinners, and lengthy conversations had revealed a shared vision of community involvement and ethical living that felt increasingly important to my sense of the future. "How was the workshop?" he asked, setting down his materials and greeting me with a quick kiss. "Successful and unexpectedly attended." Night. By Eleanor Chambers, who apparently now wants to learn home repair skills. Michael smiled. "People can surprise you." Speaking of which, he pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "This came to the office for you." Inside was a postcard from Seattle, showing the city skyline at sunset. Vanessa's handwriting filled the back. "Emmy, the affordable housing project breaks ground next month. 20 units for families transitioning from homelessness. Thought you'd appreciate knowing that some good is finally coming from all those development skills I acquired. Life takes unexpected turns, doesn't it? Sometimes the path you fought so hard to avoid is exactly where you need to be. V." I tucked the postcard into my pocket, feeling an unexpected wave of something like closure. Vanessa had found her way to meaningful work. Eleanor was learning self-sufficiency, and I had discovered strength I never knew I possessed, not just to protect what was mine, but to build something larger than myself. That evening, after closing the store, Michael and I walked to the community center for a planning meeting about the summer program schedule. The building glowed warmly in the dusk. Windows illuminated by activities continuing inside. A youth coding class, a seniors art group, a financial literacy workshop. Lives being changed in large and small ways within walls that bore my father's name. "You know," Michael said as we paused to observe the busy facility, "when I first approached you about this project, I never imagined how central it would become, not just to the neighborhood, but to your life." I leaned against his shoulder, watching a group of teenagers help an elderly man navigate a laptop. "Dad always said the measure of a life well lived isn't what you accumulate, but what you contribute. The truth of that philosophy had been proven repeatedly throughout the past 18 months. My father's modest estate, the inheritance Derek and Vanessa had so desperately coveted, had ultimately mattered far less than the values he had instilled, the example he had set, the community he had helped build one nail, one board, one act of integrity at a time. In that terrible moment at the bank, when Derek's fingers had crushed my wrist and Vanessa's smile had concealed her betrayal, I had felt utterly alone. The simple act of passing that desperate note, "Help, I'm being coerced," had been an admission of vulnerability, a recognition that I couldn't fight this battle alone. Yet that moment of weakness had become the foundation of a newer, stronger self, one who understood that asking for help wasn't surrender but wisdom, that community wasn't just a word, but a practice, that integrity wasn't an abstract virtue but a daily choice. As Michael and I entered the high, bustling community center, greeted by familiar faces and welcomed into the collective purpose of the evening's meeting, I felt my father's presence not as a ghost of the past, but as a living inheritance, a legacy built not of bank accounts and property deeds, but of values that endured, relationships that sustained, and a quiet dignity that no betrayal could diminish. In the end, I learned that what we build with our hands may shelter us, but what we build with our hearts and choices will ultimately define us. The true inheritance isn't what's left to us, but what we choose to leave behind.